sentences. And a lot of these languages have components that make up their sentences, such as nouns, verbs, subject, objects, prepositions, and so forth. And some of these languages, depending on the order you put these components, that sentence can take on a different type of meaning. And the Hebrew language is one of those languages. For example, if you were to write a sentence in the Hebrew language, and you structure it such that the subject comes first, then the verb, then the object. Subject, verb, object. That is intended to be poetic style writing in the Hebrew language, such as we see in most of the Psalms. But if you were to write a Hebrew sentence and structure it such that the verb is first, then the subject, then the object. Verb, subject, object. That is narrative style writing in the Hebrew language. History, fact. Now, how is Genesis chapter 1 translated from the Hebrew language? Well, when we translate it from the Hebrew language, it really reads in this order. In the beginning, created God the heavens. Created is the verb, God is the subject, heavens is the object. That is verb, subject, object. That is narrative style writing in the Hebrew language. History, fact. Anyone making the claim that Genesis chapter 1 is just an allegory good for spiritual teaching, or says it's just a poetic style writing, is guilty of adding their opinions into God's Word. You see, the context of the language clearly supports 6 literal days. The grammatical structure of the Hebrew language in Genesis chapter 1 clearly supports 6 literal days, narrative history. But wait, there's more. The genealogies. Oh, come on, Mike. Now you've overstepped your bounds. I have heard you can't trust these genealogies. I've heard there's missing names and gaps in there. Notice how I said that. I have heard. Very seldom is it, I have studied. It makes a big difference. But you know, when God does something, He does it perfect. Because when people make claims they can't trust the genealogies, I'll take them to 3 places in the Bible. Genesis chapter 5, 1 Chronicles 1, and Luke chapter 3. Because in all 3 places it gives the same first 10 names starting with Adam. And all we really need to do is just go to Genesis chapter 5. That'll clear it up. But again, when God does something, He does it perfect. And I've talked to Hebrew scholars. I've talked to people who know the Hebrew language well. And most of them will say there are no names missing in these first 10 names. And I've talked to some other Hebrew scholars that might admit there could be a few names missing. Now notice how I said that. Only a few. I know of no Hebrew scholars that would make the statement that there are enough names missing in these first 10 to make up for hundreds of thousands or millions of years of time. Because if there are that many names missing, then the genealogies would make no sense at all. But again, when God does something, He does it perfect. It wouldn't make any difference if there were only a few names missing here in the first 10. It wouldn't make any difference. Because when you line these first 10 names up, something very interesting shows up. What we see is Adam was living at the same time as Noah's father. And Noah was living at the same time as Abraham's father, Terah. Their lifespans overlap. It wouldn't make any difference if there's any names missing. So here's what we get now when we go back and study the written records. We see that the time from today back to the time of Jesus Christ is about 2,000 years. We also see that the time from Jesus Christ back to Abraham is about 2,000 years. So the only time in question now is from Abraham back to Adam. And the Bible clearly teaches that is also about 2,000 years. We add all this up. We have an age of the earth about 6,000 years. And I use the word about there. It could be 6,000, might even be 7,000 years. But nowhere does the Bible teach hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of years. It is not a biblical concept. Now, is that a problem scientifically? No, it is not. Didn't we just see geologically there is no requirement for long ages? Well, let's see again what some of the Hebrew scholars have to say about time. Here's a gentleman, Professor James Barr, professor of Hebrew at the University of Oxford. Now, he's a Hebrew scholar, and he's not a Christian, but he understands the Hebrew language. And this is what he states when he reads Genesis chapter 1. Probably so far as I know, there is no professor of Hebrew or Old Testament at any world-class university who dares not believe that the writers of Genesis 1 through 11 intended to convey to the readers the ideas that creation took place in a series of 6 days, which are the same as the days, the 24 hours we now experience. Even non-Christians see what the Bible has to say. The Bible teaches 6 literal days not very long ago. And then we have Dr. Robert Cole, PhD in Semitic languages, writes this: there is nothing in the Bible to obviate the idea that the days of Genesis were 24-hour type days. Nothing in the Bible to deviate from the idea they were literally 24-hour periods. That is the overwhelming consensus of the Hebrew scholars. 24-hour periods. And then we have Robert L. Raymond, PhD, wrote a book called A New Systematic Theology of the Christian Faith, makes this statement about the days of creation. In the hundreds of other cases in the Old Testament where yom stands in conjunction with an ordinal number, such as 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. Then he gives some cases where this occurs outside the book of Genesis, such as Exodus 12, verse 15, Exodus 24, verse 16, and Leviticus 12, 3. And he concludes, it never means anything other than a normal, literal day. And finally, Douglas F. Kelly, professor of systematic theology, in his book Creation and Change, makes this statement. And he says, to summarize, liberal scholars of both 19th and 20th centuries admit that the text of Genesis is clearly meant to be taken in a literal, historical sense, although they deny its claims to speak accurately to our space-time cosmos. Now, here's what he's saying. Even many of the liberal scholars, when they read Genesis chapter 1, see that it means literally 24-hour periods, but some of them choose not to accept that. They choose not to believe the Bible. Why? Because their worldview starts with man's word, not with God's word. Can we combine evolution and the Bible? Not according to the days of creation. They are completely opposite. Well, let's go to evidence number 6 then. The origin of life. Can we combine the two models here? Well, the evolution model teaches that we're nothing more than a chance accident. They teach that to our grade school children in this country. They're just a chance accident. You know what they're being taught? They're being taught that there's no hope. They're being taught when they die, that's all there is. Do you see why we have so many problems in our school systems today? They're being taught you can do anything you want. You can bring a gun to school, shoot people, then shoot yourself, and you're being taught you're not going to be held accountable for any of your actions, because they're taught that once you're dead, that's all there is. How sad it's going to be when these people stand before God and find out they were wrong and don't get a second chance. But you know, the Bible teaches just the opposite of this. The Bible teaches that God created all things. God created all life. Creation is mentioned or implied in almost every single book of the Bible. So if you're trying to bring evolution into the Bible, it's not just the book of Genesis you're going to have to change. It's almost every single book of the Bible. It'd be a whole lot easier if you just went out and wrote your own religion book. Well, let's go to evidence number 7 then. What did Jesus have to say about creation? This might make it kind of important. I hear statements like this from churches. Mike, let's not get into all this creation evolution controversy. It's really not that important. See, it's only a secondary doctrine. Just preach Jesus. Just talk about the works of Jesus. And I think that's great because Jesus Christ is the author and perfecter of our faith, and we need to keep our